Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Justin. I'm impressed by Justin's humility, saying that he has not been his best me. I keep telling all the people I shelter at home with that this is my best me, and that concerns them mightily. Damn, it is appropriate that our subject is leading through turbulence, because I don't, I think your middle name must be Turbulence, based on all the different places where you have led companies through all sorts of different kinds of issues and turbulence and problems. So let me ask you, my first question, I guess, is when you're leading through turbulence, does the way you lead, does it matter whether the turbulence has been sort of imposed upon the company by outside influences like a pandemic, or whether the turbulence has been created by a company's history, previous management, things that have happened internally?
Thank you, Kevin. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I hope
Okay.
everybody else can too.
What's that?
I hope everybody else can too.
Okay. Look, let me just start by saying this. I published this paper called Leading from Home, What They Don't Teach You in Business School. And I want to read this opening paragraph, and then I'll answer that question. I said in this article that there's a difference in leading a crisis for a company that is either facing bankruptcy, becoming outdated at the speed of technology, or becoming irrelevant in today's marketplace, compared to a company facing a global pandemic like we are with COVID-19. Pause, or is there? Because a crisis is a crisis. And I go on to say that the main ingredient in getting your team, your family on the personal side, or your business through this crisis, whatever that crisis may be, is communication. Period. End of story. So remember, in my businesses, whether it was coffee, grocery, hospitality, 95% of my employee base was made up of people working in hotels, supermarkets, distribution centers, or manufacturing facilities. They didn't cause the crisis, yet they, at the end of the day, are the ones that got each one of those companies through that crisis. And when I say communication, I'm talking about communication at every single level. For example, in every one of my companies, I had a daily voicemail message, okay? Maybe it's only 30 to 45 seconds. Or I did a video 3 times a week, and that lasted maybe a minute. But the importance of communicating in a crisis is to hear the leader's voice, whether he or she has good news to talk about or bad news. They want a touch point. And communication, to me, regardless of whose fault it is key in any crisis situation.
So I want to come back to the initial question, though. Does that mean it doesn't matter? Is the communication is key either way, but do you communicate differently? Do people really feel, if people feel betrayed by a company, even if they weren't betrayed by you, does that, because you've come into a situation, is it easier or harder to create a kind of we're all in this together ethic within the company?
No, I mean, it's again, communication, regardless of whether it's an inside, internal, or an external fault, it doesn't matter, because the majority of the employee base has not caused the crisis. And again, they're the ones that get out of it. But to your point, when you talk about communication, though, there's one key word that I want to address here, which is the art and science of communication. And it comes in the way of storytelling, which, by the way, predates writing. Simply put, people remember stories, okay? And everyone is a storyteller. That's the art. But the science behind this, neuroscience shows that just mentioning the word story causes the brain to behave differently. The facts, numbers, PowerPoint presentations, people don't retain that. They retain stories. Something about sensory receptors that sort of light up when you hear a story. I don't know the science behind that. All I know is that people remember stories, they retain stories, and once that brain becomes engaged, the heart becomes engaged, and efforts turn into results. And so it's kind of sort of the burning platform of the day when I say storytelling, but it is the thing that lets people know, again, good news or bad news, what the situation is and how we get out of the situation. And believe it or not, to your point, it brings people in a, we had 300,000 employees at Albertsons, 160,000 at Starbucks. It brings them all onto the head of a needle, of a pin, because now they're all knowing what the boss is thinking and they're all marching in the same direction.
Well, I do think I totally get that. Having worked in more organizations in my life where leaders that never wanted to share bad news, I think people's capacity for accepting bad news, if they're told they can be part of the solution, is enormous. Right?
That's what leadership does. Leadership engages people to become part of the solution. And you do that by speaking from a bully puppet or from the top of an organization. You've got to speak where all the frontline leaders are closest to the consumers are at.
It's interesting though. I mean, you were speaking about speaking, but I know you well enough to know that one of the other important parts of communication is being willing to listen. The notion of being, you call it having a freshman's mentality, like when a freshman goes to school, your eyes are open, your ears are open, and you're just absorbing. That's the best way to learn. And I know you think that's important in terms of leadership too.
Look, let me just explain the freshman mentality. I did a commencement address at the University of Washington in 2011, and to 1,100 freshmen, I said, hey, congratulations, today you're a college graduate. But I said, tomorrow you're a freshman again. And I said, what does that mean? And I said, if you go back to your freshman days at the University of Washington, here are the traits that you exhibited. Number one, you were curious. Number two, you were nervous. You were also scared. Number three is you listened more than you spoke. You asked a lot of questions and you took chances. And so I said to the crowd of 10,000 people at Alaska Airlines Arena, if all of us can become freshmen again every single day, you'll experience so much more success than you ever have before. Kevin, about listening, in this paper about leading from home, I said to the leaders out there who are all now communicating via Zoom, I said, as the leader of that call, shut up and listen. They don't want to hear about what kind of day you're having. You're the boss. They want to be listened to, and they want to be able to vent, both personal and professional, during this time of a crisis. So while listening is a key leadership ingredient in times of crisis and turbulence, it has never been more important.
I love metaphors, and a metaphor that I've ran into recently that I know is something that you agree with is the notion in the Marines where they say officers eat. That's also a critical part of leading through turbulent times. Understanding the importance of the front line, never putting yourself above and beyond.
Yeah, Kevin, you cut out on me.
I said that one of the things that a metaphor that for I think leadership in general comes from the Marines, where they talk about officers always eat last.
Right.
Always, and I know you feel very strongly about the idea of if you're going to lead through turbulence, you've got to put the front lines first.
Well, listen, every organization I go into, I always meet with the executive team and I show them the triangle that the current organization has with the CEO on top and the front line at the bottom. I said, we're not operating that way. We're going to flip this organization. We're going to put the front line at the top. Why wouldn't you? 95% of your organization is closest to the consumer. And you in this room with me, we are dead last. We are never going to eat first. But where I got that from is in between my leadership roles at certain companies, I was a consultant. And it didn't last long because I went in to do my first gig and I was told that there'd be 30 executives show up. And I told them I'd bring lunch. And so I arrived at this headquarters with 30 pizzas. And lo and behold, much to my surprise, there were 40 people there. So I said to the group, you guys get started. I'm going to call in 10 more pizzas and we'll go. Well, I couldn't help but notice that the chairman and the CEO and the president jumped to the front of the line to make sure that they could get their pizzas first. They didn't want to not have pizzas for them. I was heartbroken. I ordered the pizzas. I gave a half-hearted speech and never called them back to see if I got that gig or not. Leaders have to go last. Now there's times when leaders have to be first. And in times of crisis, leaders need to run two problems and lead their teams into those problems and not away from them. But when it comes to listening, when it comes to showing people how important they are, I got to tell you, it's not about that leader anymore. It's about the people that are going to make this company, their company, successful, not only during crisis times, but times outside of crisis.
Do you think that when you look at the supermarket industry today, and I'm not talking specifically about Albertsons here, but do you think the supermarket industry can come out of this pandemic, this crisis, this turbulence better as opposed to being diminished or being the same? I mean, you think there's that opportunity?
Let me talk about retail in general and about the supermarket business as well. So I'm in the process now preparing a lecture for a graduating class of 2020 at the University of Washington. And like I always do, I email each of the students, there was 100 in this case, and I introduced myself, here's my bio, and then I said, hey, if you got a question, send it, because I want to know what you want me to talk about. My subject was leading in a crisis, but I want to know what's on their mind. And so I got 100 emails out, I got 100 emails back. And what I want to talk about has nothing to do with what they want to talk about. And one of the questions, which helps me answer your question, is this. Hey, Jim, a student said, when do things get back to normal? And I answered every one of them. And to her, I responded, they're never going to get back to normal. They'll get back to what is a new normal. Now, when I compare that to what's happening at retail, as retailers all over the world attempted to find this new normal, I'll say this, and here again is a story. And I know when you mention the word story, everybody's listening. Quote by Warren Buffett, you can always see who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. Well, I got to tell you, this COVID-19 tide is out, and we're seeing some retailers swimming fairly naked right now. And maybe it's going to be, to your point, you get better, the survival of the fittest balance sheet. Maybe it's going to be a weak company that performed well in this 9 to 10 weeks of this operation lockdown that all of a sudden is going to have a new lease on life. Maybe it was the darling of retail that dropped the ball during this particular 9 to 10 weeks of the pandemic, and they're going to have just the opposite in terms of performance. We'll see. We'll see. But when we come out of the pandemic, retail, in my opinion, will be altered, but I think it's going to be altered in a way that helps the customer shop when, where, and how they want. And retailers that are up to speed will definitely have to get up to speed regardless of it's brick and mortar or it's e-commerce.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. People are asking you, are things going to get back to normal? I always think normal is such a relative word. I think there's an old reality and there's going to be a new reality. And I think it's adapting to a new reality. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Let me ask you one final question. So there's the whole notion of this conference, and I know Tom Blishock is going to talk a lot about this following this conversation, the notion of de-investing from some initiative, you have the money to reinvest in new initiatives, and how it's in a lot of ways, de-investing is the harder decision to make because people have emotional, financial commitments to things that maybe just have dust on them, but they've been there for a while. So let me ask you a question. If you had to pick 1 or 2, 3 things in the supermarket industry in general that you would de-invest from, that you think have outlived their usefulness, that are worth retiring, what would they be?
Kevin, first of all, that's a great question. And everybody on this call, everybody in the world should be asking themselves, both personally and professionally, especially over the last few months as objects don't seem as special anymore, they would de-invest in. And maybe time personally with oneself to reflect with family, heck, even cooking at home. I'm starting to reinvest in that personally myself. So I think the question's a great one. From a personal standpoint, I had de-invested in razor blades and I'm reinvesting in clippers because I'm starting to grow a little goatee. I kind of like that. But from a professional side, and some of these will surprise you, I would de-invest excuse me, in offices, and I would start to reinvest in working from home. It's crazy where we're going in the new normal. But a friend of mine told me a fact that it seems like working from home has emboldened people to make courageous decisions, take risks they haven't taken before. Why, I said. He said, perhaps because they're not in a boardroom with a boss who's kind of like saying no to their idea, rolling his or her eyes, or doing everything. I think that I de-invest in offices and I would reinvest in working from home. I'd also I'd also de-invest in executives making only decisions, and I'd reinvest in giving the front line the ability to start making decisions. After all, they're the closest to the consumer, especially during this pandemic. And when we come out of this, you're going to want to hear what those decisions are. I de-invest in old school method of capital, okay? With capital, with the exception of the front ends, and I'll get to that. And I start reinvesting in technology that fits this period of time. For example, we're investing in micro-fulfillment centers, and the learning that it's given us from a drive up and go or home delivery is unbelievable in terms of pace, speed to the customer. I'd de-invest in check stands. I'd reinvest in self-checkouts, which we're doing, and also with handhelds. And finally, I would de-invest in large store formats, and I'd start to reinvest, which we're doing as well, in small formats, okay? This pandemic shows that the 80-20 rule applies, and it applies in spades. And so it's interesting to see, you know, from both a soft and a hard perspective, what needs to be done with regards to shedding and reinvesting in it.
Well, that is quite a list. And I think the interesting thing to me about almost everything on that list is the thing we share in common is bringing the business closer to the customer. Almost everything you talked about, whether it's being at home because you're dealing on a regular basis with the things that customers are dealing with, or smaller stores, more targeted stores, dark stores, fulfillment centers, everything's about getting closer to the customer, which is, I think, listen, that's the holy grail when it comes to this industry. Then we are out of time.
But Kevin, let me just leave with this, and Justin mentioned this. So for everybody out there, always keep in mind that it's the experience that makes people smart. It is the experience that they're going through that's going to lead them smarter at the end of the day. And every day, what I try to do is make every day a classroom and keep track of at least one thing I've learned. So Justin, you were right on when you talked about the experience that one's getting from this. So thanks. That's it, Kevin. I'm done. Thanks, everybody, and have a great conference.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate your time.